Somewhere beyond the last trembling echo of the Astronomican's light, in the cold expanse where even demons move like shadows afraid of their own hunger, something impossible carved a wound into reality. It did not arrive. It forced its way through, ripping open the void with a scream of gravity and spite. The warp recoiled, as though recognizing a predator it had not created, and yet it welcomed him. Because even the warp knows how to bow when true cruelty enters the room. He stepped out of the rift with the serenity of a man admiring his own reflection, a tyrant from a distant cosmos, pale as polished bone and carved with violet cracks that pulsed like embryonic stars. His eyes, cinders of hatred held within something colder than vacuum, studied the roiling tides of demonic essence, not with awe, but with assessment. He had conquered planets. He had broken warriors. He had torn kings from their thrones. But here, in this warped cathedral of madness, Frieza found something he had never encountered before, a playground worthy of him. Warp storms twisted like serpents along his shoulders, tasting him, whispering tempting promises. But the creature did not kneel. He did not tremble. He smiled, the kind of smile that makes suns dim and armies reconsider their faith. Because Frieza didn't see chaos as a master, he saw it as a throne waiting for someone worthy enough to sit upon it. In that moment, across 1,000 fractured worlds, cults heard a voice that wasn't supposed to exist in their scriptures. The Imperial Tarot shuddered. Astropaths cried out in rooms sealed with gold. And on Terra, beneath the endless machinery of the Golden Throne, some whispered that the Emperor's gaze briefly turned toward a storm no mortal tongue could name. If Frieza had arrived in the galaxy of Warhammer 40K, the galaxy would never be the same. This is the story of the day chaos gained a new lord, one not born of the warp, but one the warp would learn to fear. If you can feel the storm tightening already, if you want to see what happens when an outsider rewrites the rules of chaos itself, stay with the story. And if these journeys across impossible worlds speak to you, lend your strength to the channel, like, share, and subscribe so these tales can keep tearing open new universes. The first sensation Frieza felt was not pain, nor disorientation, nor even the instinctive flare of his Kai against a hostile environment. It was curiosity, a cold, crystalline curiosity that slid through him like an old companion he had long forgotten. The warp did not welcome him, it seized him. It dragged him inward in a spiraling whirl of demonic pressure, colors that had never existed in his reality, and whispers that lapped at the edges of thought like parasites attempting to burrow into a mind they could not understand. Most beings thrown unprotected into the Imperium are reduced to immortal screams within seconds. Frieza did not scream. He observed. Gravity flickered. Time folded in on itself like wet parchment. Demons rushed toward him, silhouettes pried from nightmare, each formed from hatred, hunger, or ancient promises of torment they expected another soul to devour. They found something else, something immaculate, something venomously self-contained, something that looked upon them the way a biologist looks at an insect pinned beneath glass. He lifted a hand, letting the warp's raw chaos lick across his fingers. The energy recoiled. It did not understand him. It did not know how to seduce him, because Frieza's soul was not built from the emotional filth the warp fed upon. He was cruelty refined into instinct, tyranny distilled into elegance, and alien supremacy tempered by a lifetime of conquest. The warp could twist mortal psychers, even gods. But Frieza was not a creature born of belief or weakness. He was a force of intention. Around him, the warp shuddered. A great tidal wave of demonic forms surged forward, sensing a challenge to their domain. Some bore wings of liquid shadow. Some crawled with too many limbs. Some emitted a psychic cacophony that would have liquefied human synapses. Frieza watched them as calmly as a patron in a garden admiring the arrangements. When the first demon lunged, he moved so quickly the warp struggled to interpret the action. Light erupted. Not warp light, not psychic discharge. Kaye, pure, ordered, self-generated, a weapon the warp had no reference for. It shredded the demon into violet mist that dissolved before its scream could finish. Others hesitated. Demons rarely hesitate, yet even they sensed something unholy in the fact that he retained his form, his mind, and his certainty within a dimension that takes pride in erasing such things. Frieza drifted forward, feet never quite touching the ground, cape flowing behind him like a blade of darkness carved from royal cloth. The warp contorted around his presence, trying to reshape itself to digest him, but every fluctuation collapsed the moment it touched his aura. Space bent into spirals. It reopened behind him, frustrated. Lightning crackled upside down. Liquid shadows tried to seep into his pores. They evaporated against his skin. Fascinating, he murmured, voice echoing strangely as if the warp struggled to determine where sound should originate. A universe made entirely of will, how quaint. A river of screaming faces erupted beneath him, souls tormented for millennia. It tried to pull him down. Frieza dipped a foot into the torrent as though testing bathwater. Instantly, the river crystallized from fear, its current freezing in a perfect line of purple-black ice. Souls trapped within the ice twitched but could not move. The warp had adapted itself for trillions of years, learning to devour psychers, mortals, demons, and even the memories of the dead. It had never adapted to him. Wordless murmurs rippled outward, carried not by sound but by concept, a warning spreading through a domain that rarely warns anyone. Something new had arrived, something that did not bow, something whose essence did not fit into the catalogs of torment and seduction. A violent tremor passed through the dimension, and from the chaos emerged a creature far larger than the others. A grotesque amalgamation of horn, sinew, mouths, and flame. A greater demon of Khorne, its presence heavy with the stink of blood and unending rage. It towered over Frieza, muscles rippling with hatred that burned hotter than any sun. Its axe was forged from the gravitational collapse of murdered stars. It roared and the warp shook. Frieza barely glanced at it. The demon charged. Frieza vanished. A heartbeat later, he appeared perched upon its shoulder, one finger resting elegantly against the creature's temple. The giant froze, unable to move, unable to comprehend the tiny touch. Frieza leaned closer. "You are loud," he whispered. The demon imploded, not exploded, imploded, crushed inward into a singularity of its own essence before evaporating into nothing. Its soul shrieked in agony for a fraction of a second before even that was consumed. The warp trembled again, but this tremor was not rage. It was fear. From distant non-places, other entities retreated. Tzeentchian minds folded into new shapes to hide from his gaze. Nurgle's plagues curled back like leaves recoiling from frost. Even Slaaneshi currents dimmed, finding no purchase upon a soul devoid of longing. Only one power watched him with interest rather than dread. Khorne, whose bloodlust howled approval through the dimension, sensing a creature who killed not from passion but from perfect, merciless efficiency. But even Khorne's approval carried unease, for this being did not kill to honor him. He killed because the obstacle existed. Frieza raised a hand and carved a line through the air. The warp parted like cloth. Behind it, deeper layers flickered, realms so ancient that even demons feared to tread. He saw possibilities, pathways, thrones, armies sculpted from nightmares waiting for a will strong enough to command them. He saw a galaxy starving for order, his order. He floated forward, cape whispering behind him. My, he said softly. You are a messy universe, but even messes can be tamed. With each step, the warp bent further, storming around him like a vast cathedral formed from the collective madness of billions, and yet, within that storm, something took shape. A silhouette, a throne, a crown made not of metal, but of submission. The warp itself began reshaping in anticipation. It always reshaped itself around its strongest children. But Frieza was no child of chaos. He was something the warp had no preparation for. And the warp, for the first time in an eternity measured by the suffering of souls, hesitated. At the edge of that hesitation, Frieza smiled. He had found his new empire, and it was infinite. The rift opened above the forsaken world of Vargas 9 like a wound that refused to close, pulsing with the sickly rhythm of a heartbeat stolen from something older than stars. The planet had long been abandoned to the eye of terror's drifting tides, its manufactorums hollowed out centuries ago, its people scattered into feral tribes who worshipped anything loud enough to be mistaken for a god. Yet even these broken remnants of humanity had never witnessed a sky tear itself apart in such exquisite silence. No thunder, no flame. Just a smooth, widening seam, as if reality were reluctantly parting for something it did not want to admit existed. When Frieza stepped through, the air did not scream. It simply stopped moving, as though terrified it might offend the intruder. He landed lightly upon cracked ferrocrete, hands behind his back, tail curling with the slow amusement of a predator surveying a new ecosystem. His eyes traced the horizon, rusted factory spires leaning like snapped bones, skeletal hab blocks smothered in fungal corrosion, half-collapsed statues of imperial saints long forgotten. There was no challenge here, only opportunity. The mortals who witnessed his arrival did not run. They fell, some flat on their faces, others to their knees, trembling under a pressure they mistook for divine presence. None of them understood why they bowed, only that the act felt instinctive, as natural as breathing. Frieza considered them with a faint tilt of the head, like a jeweler examining gemstones of questionable value. He did not sense power in them, only desperation and hunger. But desperation, he knew, could be shaped. One of the mortals rose shakily. A hive scavenger draped in the rags of a once functional regiment, Imperial Aquila, faded across his chest like a forgotten promise. Eyes wild, he pointed at Frieza as though terrified to look and too terrified to look away. You stepped through the sky, the man stammered. The warp itself made way for you. Frieza's smile was small, elegant, perfect. Did it now? The man swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing like a drowning swimmer. Are you a demon? A demon? Frieza repeated softly, as if tasting the word. No, I am something far more refined. The scavenger fell again, forehead thudding against the ground. Others followed, forming a trembling semicircle around him. To Frieza, it looked like the beginning of a throne room. Crude, misshapen. But every empire begins with someone willing to kneel. From the ruins above, a metallic shriek cut through the silence. A group of traitor cultists emerged, adorned in bone trinkets and wrapped in tattered crimson robes. Their leader, a gaunt figure with a vox grill implanted into his throat, raised a serrated blade dripping with burnt ichor. "Blasphemers!" he bellowed. "You kneel to no one but the dark gods?" He didn't finish the sentence. Frieza flicked a single finger. A beam of violet energy sliced through the cult leader so precisely his upper torso slid off before his followers understood he had died. The corpse crumpled, steaming. Frieza's hand returned behind his back as if he had merely brushed away dust. The remaining cultists froze. Those who moments ago had screamed praises to Korn now stared at this new being. Bone-white skin unmarred, eyes like molten daggers, aura suffused not with the sloppy wrath of demons but with exquisite, calculated dominance. They weren't sure what he was, but they didn't need to be. They recognized power, they recognized hierarchy, they recognized a tyrant, and tyrants attract followers. A robed psyker, face half melted from warp exposure, crawled toward Frieza with trembling reverence. She pressed her forehead to the ground and whispered a prayer in a tongue that wasn't entirely human. The moment she spoke, her voice carried across the ruins as though the warp itself amplified her. A new name, a new throne, a new lord rises. The scavengers and renegades shifted unsure, but as the psyker lifted her head, her eyes glowed with violet flame. "He is not of chaos," she said in a voice layered with echoes, "but chaos bends before him." Frieza considered her. He felt the warp pulsing behind her words, not as a puppeteer, but as an observer, testing him, measuring him, wondering if this intruder might be worthy of integration or annihilation. And he felt something else. Fear. Not from the warp, from the psyker, from the mortals, from the cultists unsure if they were witnessing sacrilege or salvation. Fear, he thought, was a wonderful tool. He approached her slowly. "You seem eager to kneel." "I kneel to power," she whispered. Frieza offered a single gracious nod. "Then you may rise. Those who kneel to power have already taken the first step towards serving it." Her eyes widened with bliss and horror. She rose, trembling, staring at him as though she had glimpsed her purpose for the first time. Behind them, others followed. Scavengers, deserters, heretics, even the remaining cultists. They formed a growing ring around him, breathless, waiting. The psyker pointed toward the warp rift above, still pulsing. "The gods will test you." Frieza looked skyward, cape lifting in the hot wind. "Let them." As if answering a challenge, the air split again. This time it was not serene. This time it screamed. A creature descended. A demon-bound warrior clad in corrupted ceramite, bearing a chain axe still dripping with the souls of its victims. The crowd scattered. Even the psyker reeled, shielding her face. Frieza did not move. The demon host screamed an invocation to Khorne and swung its weapon through the air, carving a path that warped the very light around it. It was an apex predator in this realm, a monster forged from eternal agony, a creature that had survived a dozen battlefields and feasted on thousands of lives. Frieza sighed. In a blur, he vanished. The demon host's head hit the ground before its body realized it was dead. The chain axe clattered beside it, still humming. Frieza hovered above the corpse, brushing a speck of ash from his shoulder. "You called that a test?" he asked the sky, though the sky had no answer. The mortals stared, their terror transmuting into reverence. Something like a collective exhale swept through them, a surrender not to kindness but to inevitability. This creature, whatever he was, belonged above them. Their worship was not worship at all. It was instinct. The psyker knelt again, voice cracking with awe. "My lord, command us." Frieza regarded the kneeling ring of mortals, the corpse of the demon host, and the rift still bleeding into the world. He had been in this universe only minutes, and already its children were offering him a throne. He smiled faintly. "Very well," he said. "Let us begin with something simple." He lifted a hand. The warp rift pulsed. The air ignited with violet flame. "Kneel," he whispered. And the first cult of Frieza was born. The first warning did not come as a scream, but as a silence on Terra deep within the sealed vaults of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. A choir of astropaths froze mid-incantation. Their mouths hung open, yet no sound emerged. Their eyes glazed over, reflecting not the vaulted chamber around them, but a hovering silhouette of pale skin and purple light. For a moment, their minds became windows into a distant world no imperial map recorded, and through those windows poured a presence that should not have been able to cross the Astronomican's veil. When they collapsed, their bodies spasmed in unison. their minds burned not by chaos but by something colder, sharper, more deliberate. The adepts rushed to contain the incident. Administratum scribes scurried through data slates documenting psychic anomalies, desperately cross-referencing with known demonic signatures none matched. Interrogators from the Ordo Malleus arrived within the hour, their gold-inlaid armor absorbing torchlight like hungry obsidian. They listened to the dying whispers of the astropaths, half-sentences choked in terror, references to a being who walked through the warp untouched, a pale tyrant sculpted from cruelty, a lord before whom demons bowed. The Inquisitors did not believe them. They believed the warp was an ocean of madness with predictable storms. But this was something new, something the lexicons of forbidden knowledge did not prepare them for. They sealed the chamber, cloaked the bodies, and sent a coded report up the chain. And as that report flowed into the higher strata of the Imperium's intelligence web, one word kept reappearing like a stain refusing to be scrubbed out. Intruder on Mars, tech priests of the cult. Mechanicus detected oscillations in the noospheric tides, subtle yet profound shifts in background immaterium current that suggested a foreign intelligence had exerted pressure on reality itself. Their augmented minds flickered with streams of binaric alarm speech. Some even dared whisper to one another that something had trespassed not just upon the warp, but upon the engine logic that sustained it. Others dismissed this as data corruption. But the more readings they processed, the more undeniable it became. Something had entered their universe that did not belong to its architecture. The Adeptus Custodes received a whisper long before anyone else. Not an official alert, those were slow, saturated with bureaucratic decay, but a ripple in the Master's light that only they, with their golden perfection, could perceive. To others it would have been nothing. A faint flicker, a momentary dimming of stations along the Golden Throne's perimeter. But to the Custodes who stood vigil before the Imperium's heart for 10 millennia, it was unmistakable. The Master's gaze had shifted, perhaps only for an instant. Perhaps only as a reflex, a glance toward something clawing for significance. But the Custodes felt it like a chill passing through living statues. Something unnatural had entered the game board. Across the galaxy, rogue psychers felt the tremor too, their visions contorted into grotesque mosaics, fractured glimpses of a figure whose very presence redefined hierarchy. Some saw him seated upon a throne of skulls and torn metal. Others saw him gliding through the warp like a sovereign made of glass and murder. One particularly gifted seer, lost deep within the labyrinth city of Kamarag, tore her own face to escape the image that forced itself upon her mind. She babbled until her death about a smile sharper than any demon's teeth. The Inquisition gathered these rumors like embers from a spreading firestorm, and with each ember the fire grew. Reports surfaced of a renegade group of cultists, not dedicated to Khorne, Nurgle, Slanesh, or Tzeentch, but to a new figure entirely. Their shrines did not bear the iconography of chaos. They bore the likeness of a pale conqueror with black horns and regal armor, eyes glowing with amethyst fire. These cults operated unpredictably. They did not embrace mutation. They did not revel in madness. They sought only to serve their new lord with precision and obedience, as though honoring not a god of emotion but a monarch of intention. That was what unsettled the Inquisition the most. Wars could be fought against chaos, heresy could be purged. But a new power that operated with method rather than mania. That was dangerous in a way the galaxy had not faced since the days when Horus bore his father's authority into rebellion. The Ordo Malleus mobilized kill teams. Grey Knights were dispatched to investigate worlds where the warp had rippled in unnatural patterns. On one such world they found a crater, perfectly spherical, glassed down to the mantle. And at its center stood a single stone, carved with uncanny elegance, bearing a sigil none recognized. It was not demonic. It was not imperial. But the glyph carried a message any warrior could interpret. I am here. As kill teams reported increasingly disturbing anomalies, a question began to spread among the Inquisitors like a bitter taste. Was this a new demon prince? A weapon forged by the dark gods? A psyker of unprecedented mutation? Or more terrifying, something outside even the warp's lineage? While the Imperium struggled to define him, Frieza himself walked through new territories within the Imperium, molding its storms with idle gestures. Wherever he ventured, the warp grew still, not out of reverence, but because the dimension was still learning how to modify itself around him. His cult, now growing faster than any mortal religion should, spread his iconography across worlds like a contagion. They bore no mutations, no demonic gifts. Instead, they exuded a cold discipline that unsettled even chaos warbands. There was something disturbingly calculated about their devotion. They worshipped Frieza not out of need, but out of certainty. The Imperium's reaction grew more frantic. The Inquisition authorized higher tiers of alert forbidden libraries were opened. Artifacts sealed since the Great Crusade were examined for any precedent of an extra-dimensional tyrant reshaping the warp. Through sheer intent, none were found. But one document, buried beneath 10 layers of classification, mentioned a whisper, perhaps apocryphal, of the Emperor encountering beings beyond mortal comprehension long before humanity's recorded history. Whether this story held truth or was simply the delusion of a dying remembrancer, none could say. Yet its timing was unnerving. The High Lords of Terra convened behind adamantium doors, debating the nature of the threat. Some argued it was a trick of Tzeentch. Others claimed it was a new chaos manifestation. A few believed it might be an omen of the Imperium's long-lost salvation. Or destruction, they argued. They theorized. They bickered in the comfortable blindness of politicians. But far beneath the palace, in a chamber where dust dared not settle, a single custodian stood before a sealed gate adorned with burnished gold. He did not speak. He did not move. But within his enhanced mind echoed one unspoken truth. The galaxy had not gained a new god. It had gained a new problem, and problems of this magnitude did not resolve themselves. The warp quieted around him as if the dimension itself had paused mid-breath. Frieza stood upon a grotesque platform of twisted metal and bone, once a warpsmith's fortress, now reshaped by his presence into something that resembled a throne dais. What remained of the original structure trembled beneath his feet, its demonic engines sputtering like dying hearts. The twisted architecture bled light that pulsed with a rhythm more biological than mechanical. But even this corruption bent away from him, as though aware that its own madness was not welcome in the shape he intended to carve. He surveyed the realm with a satisfied ease. In the distance, tides of raw immaterium curled like serpents made of smoke and memory. Demon hordes shifted restlessly across rifts that stretched into eternity, but none approached. They lingered at the thresholds, gazing through the shreds of space like predators uncertain of their place in the new order. Frieza understood their hesitation, and it pleased him he had no interest in ruling through chaos. He intended to rule through precision. His cult had exploded in number, mortals drawn from worlds fractured by warp storms, deserters from traitor warbands seeking a master who demanded discipline rather than intoxicated frenzy, psychers who sensed a presence they could not categorize. They did not mutate under his influence. They did not grow horns, sprout claws, or become hosts for demonic parasites. Instead, they grew cold, focused, as though the warp itself, under Frieza's shadow, emphasized clarity over delirium. They gathered around the fortress, kneeling upon broken stone. Their chants carried a cadence unlike any cult within the Eye of Terror. No screams, no ecstatic sobbing, no unhinged fervor. Their voices moved like a disciplined legion, synchronized with terrifying unity as they intoned the name they had carved into their tongues. Lord Frieza. Frieza watched them with the detached amusement of a monarch observing his court. He did not require their worship, but the sight of mortals aligning themselves without mutation, without madness, without needing reward. It stirred a small ember of satisfaction within him. They were not shackled by chaos's indulgence. They were bound by something purer, fear sharpened into devotion. Behind him, the warp rippled, a towering figure emerged. An armored chaos champion clad in warped ceramite, helmet sprouting horns that twisted like gnarled iron. His aura radiated the same murderous contempt that had broken entire sectors. The champion approached slowly, blade dragging against the metal floor, sparks hissing into the air. His voice was a serrated growl. "You trespass upon our gods," he said. "You draw their attention. You warp their territory to your preference." His blade lifted toward Frieza's chin. "You defy the order of damnation itself." Frieza tilted his head almost thoughtfully. "I am afraid your order is very disorganized." The champion lunged, blade slicing downward with the weight of a dying star. But the moment steel met air, Frieza was behind him, finger pressed lightly to the back of his helmet. A frown, almost polite, crossed Frieza's face. "Your technique lacks elegance." The champion's body collapsed inward, armor folding like empty parchment, demonic essence unraveling in a streak of violet light. The cult gasped as his remains drifted away like ashes. Frieza waved aside the debris as though clearing dust from a cushion. "Send another," he murmured to the empty air, "if you think it will make a difference." On distant horizons of the warp, 4 immense presences stirred. Khorne's domain flared, a crimson continent trembling with bloodthirst. Nurgle's garden quivered, spores shifting as if sniffing out new corruption. Slaanesh's silken caverns fluttered with predatory allure. Tzeentch's labyrinth twisted in agitation, corridors reweaving with sudden frantic purpose. Frieza felt them, not directly, but through the actions of the warp around him. The wind changed direction, light dimmed, colors saturated the surface beneath his feet, rippled like a creature adjusting its posture. Not fear, not hostility, observation. The dark gods were watching, each trying to determine whether this interloper was a threat, a tool, or a variable outside their prediction. Frieza took his place upon the throne he had crafted. A structure of dark metal infused with foreign ki, anchored by the fortress's original bones. When he sat, the air trembled. Not because the throne was demonic, it wasn't. It resisted mutation, glow, or whispering mouths. It bent only in the direction Frieza commanded, rejecting every influence except his own. A low murmur moved through the cult, awe turning to near hysteria as they witnessed a sight no mortal had ever seen. A throne in the warp that responded not to chaos, but to a will entirely alien from the dais. Frieza gazed upward. There was a moment when everything in the warp stilled, the demons holding their breath, the winds pausing mid-gust, the shrieking colors dimming into subdued spectrums. Even the dark god's domains shimmered with hesitation. Frieza lifted his hand. The warp folded around it as if waiting to be sculpted. He closed his fist. A shockwave traveled outward, not destructive but declarative. It carried a simple message across a dimension that had never known foreign sovereignty. I exist, I reign, and I am not yours. The warp recoiled in fascination. Across dozens of demon worlds, nightmares flinched. Cults bent their knees to an idol whose foundations were not written in the Book of Lorgar or whispered in shrines dedicated to the ruinous powers. Even among the traitor legions, whispers spread like wildfire. Of a pale conqueror who defied mutation, who killed demons without hatred, who commanded mortals without promising corruption. Some called him the fifth god, others the false one. But within the darkest corners of the warp, a different name took hold, spoken by demons in tones rarely used for anything but prophecy. The fifth shadow. And far away on Terra, beneath the endless mechanisms of the Golden Throne, acolytes lit candles against a sudden and inexplicable chill. Some claimed a fleeting shift passed through the chamber, like a movement in the Emperor's presence. A rumor, nothing more. But the custodes standing closest to the throne felt something undeniable. A faint alignment, as if two impossibly distant wills had acknowledged each other across a gulf of unreality. Whether in warning or curiosity, none could say. Frieza did not notice the tremor on Terra. He did not care. His gaze remained upon the formless horizon, regal and unhurried, as violet energy rippled across his form. His empire would not be built upon planets alone. It would be built upon nightmare. He leaned back upon the throne, his throne, and the warp bent around him like a kingdom awaiting coronation.